reduction is, in fact, at the top of the waste hierarchy. So most importantly, this would send an unequivocal signal that the reduction of residual waste is the way forward towards circularity and sustainability. So the event today is going to provide an opportunity for an open debate on the need to improve the Landfill Directive and the Waste Framework Directive, highlighting that residual waste reduction is a crucial tool to ensure alignment with the overarching principles of the EU Circular Economy Agenda. In our event today, we're going to have the presentation of the latest Zero Waste Europe report titled Rethinking the EU Landfill Target, and this will be followed by a panel discussion between our speakers. Regarding the webinar tools that we're using today, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box. It'd be lovely to hear your name and your organization. And for questions, please submit your questions via the Q&A tool, which I will then pass on to the speakers to save time. This webinar platform that we are using has a maximum capacity of 100 participants. So we are also streaming on YouTube. So those joining via YouTube, please, you can submit your questions in the chat there. Right, so without further delay, let's start this exciting discussion by giving the floor to Margaret Oaken, the member of European Parliament, for the keynote remarks. Thanks so much, Margaret, for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, and thank you very much for arranging this here and for inviting me. Well, I'm formally inviting you, but thank you very much. It's really a very important issue here. You know, in the EU, we are using an absurd amount of material resources in our economy. The extraction of these materials often creates severe environmental and social problems, and the same goes for the large quantities of waste these resources turn into. One of the keys to improve the situation is to go from a linear to a circular economy, where everything or close to everything we produce is used again. The circularity has to be the logic from product design to sourcing of materials, production, and after-use life. Repair, reuse, recycling, and recovery are the essential elements of the waste hierarchy when it comes to circular economy. However, as you mentioned before, it's currently not realistic to imagine a situation where absolutely no waste is left. What remains after recyclable and usable materials has to be separated. That is called what we call the residual waste, is typically either deposited in landfills or incinerated for energy purposes. As we will hear later today, EU waste policy largely favors the latter option, but both are problematic for the environment, and come with serious and social justice issues attached. For this reason, the absolute priority of the waste hierarchy is, as you say, prevention. We need. Hvad lavede du? Sorry, just a little bit.
Jeg ved ikke, hvad det kommer fra.
Can we come back? Something has happened here, sorry. Altså, hvad sker der? Væk med dig. Sorry.
Prøv at snakke igen.
Jeg kan godt prøve at snakke igen, men jeg er her ikke. Did you get me again? No? I'm there, you know. Okay.
It's all good now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're coming to the basic of prevention, eh? And we need to produce, of course, less waste and full stop. And we have had very few laws in the EU which really goes for prevention. The first one was the one I was rapporteur on, was the plastic bag law, was the first one ever talking about prevention. You know, they're just going immediately into all the other things, or very often to incineration. But we have to find this, to stop this here at the source if we should do this here in a good way. But we should not only produce less waste, we should produce less at large. In February this year, I negotiated the Parliament's position of the Commission's new Circular Economy Action Plan for the Green Group. In the Environment Committee. The Commission has done a great job in many ways, but there was still space for improvement, and we fought hard for an ambitious and constructive position. I mention it now because one of the main demands in our report is binding EU targets for 2030 to bring EU's material footprint within the planetary boundaries by 2050. I'm not talking about a sad and depressing future where we have to forsake all comforts of our everyday life. It is possible to live a full and rich life with respecting the carrying capacity of this boundless planet. It will certainly require adaptation. We will have to reimagine our narratives and our aspirations to become aware of what is actually valuable in life. What we do need is not big SUVs and private jets to be successful. Well, I've always had one of my slogans that if you cannot combat the whole world on bike, you have problems with your self-confidence. And that's good to bear in mind, that arriving at big conferences on bike, where all the others are there with their scaffolds on metal and so on, you are ahead of the debate from the beginning if you just have the self-confidence to do that. I'm not crusading about personal ambition and aspiration for success, but it is entirely in our hands whether we idolize those using their successes to accumulate material assets while wrecking the planet, or those who take responsibility and show solidarity, whatever rich or not we are. Returning to today's topic, residual waste is in many ways a proxy for how we are doing further up the chain. The day we don't have any more residual waste, we have come a long way in reducing our own material consumption and creating a circular economy. But thank you again for the attention, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for your very interesting insights. It is now the time to give the floor to Dr. Dominic Hock, Director at Equanimator. I hope I pronounced that well. Please correct me if not. To present to you the main findings of the report, Rethinking the EU Landfill Target. Thank you so much, Dominic. The floor is yours. You were mute, I believe. We can hear you. Yes.
Sorry about that.
That's
can
okay.
everybody see the slides now, I hope? So thank you, Marielle, for inviting me, and thanks, Margrethe, for the excellent introduction. I think, yeah, we can be confident that we're not arriving anywhere for this conference. So we're staying put. We're very virtuous today. So yeah, I'm very happy to present this. I think it's an interesting issue, and as Margrethe said, it's, you know, landfill incineration, the way we deal with residual waste. You know, what are we trying to do? We're really looking for some ways of reducing residual waste, but in the meantime, making sure that we're dealing with it in an environmentally sensible way. So not doing things like this, and that we're not hindering these improvements that we can make in waste prevention and recycling. And I think that's been one of the concerns with some of the policies that that are in place at the moment. And once we're in the lower levels of the waste hierarchy, to some extent, the battle has been lost, or that's how it sometimes appears. It sort of looks like we're sort of having a fight for the scraps. If you look at this chart, which was something I prepared in my former life at Eunomia with colleagues for Zero Waste Europe, you sort of see these climate change benefits relative to what may happen through things that you can do higher in the waste hierarchy. They look relatively minor. But as it turns out, that doesn't mean we can't improve. And I think we need to improve, given the challenges facing us all in terms of climate change going forward. So, you know, and it's not one or the other that needs changes. They both do. We need to sort them both out so that we're dealing with waste responsibly. We have about 240 million tons of municipal waste generated every year in Europe. So even if we got to 65% recycling, if we didn't actually reduce any of that, we'd still have something like 80 odd million tons of 70-80 million tons of waste being treated as residual waste. We already have 60 going to incineration, about 50 or so in landfills. So we need to think about whether we've got our policy right. And my concern, I guess, is it doesn't seem like we've changed that for quite a long time, even though the framing conditions that might lead us to review those, the performance of both and how we think about them, have really changed quite profoundly. So the first of these is the decarbonisation of power and energy more generally, but power is the one that's been changing fastest, with support from renewables, European emissions trading scheme, carbon taxes. Here's what's happened to the carbon intensity of power generation since 1990, and it's dropped from 531 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour down to 226. And that's seen different. We've got different carbon intensities across the EU. So you can see all the different member states fall into different bands, and there's really quite radical differences in performance. And we'd expect the ones on the right-hand side, hopefully, to shift to the left over time and hopefully quickly as we go, given that it's clearly possible. We got heat that's decarbonising also, albeit at a different rate. So it's not affected by all of the same policies and not always the same technical possibilities. And that matters because it reduces the credits that we get for any form of generating energy from waste. So, it was often the case in the past where you think, oh, great, waste, we can generate energy from it because we can displace dirty fossil fuels. But we're not displacing those dirty fossil fuels anymore. We're actually we're going towards a situation where we're going to be displacing wind and solar and maybe nuclear as well. So we're in a very different situation to the one we were in. And we're finding out more about the damage costs associated with the different pollutants that are of concern. Just recently, the latest IPCC report is clearly saying to us, methane is a critical factor in determining the pace at which the climate changes as we go forward. And you saw yesterday the announcements of several countries buying into the Global Methane Partnership to make commitments to reduce their methane emissions in the coming years. And so for landfill, methane is critical. For incineration, if you take away if you start to look at the benefits of energy generation decreasing, it's the fossil-derived carbon dioxide that's critical, the stuff that comes from burning plastics in the main. You could argue that it's also the non-fossil CO2 that matters. That's a debate about methodologies of reporting and accounting for CO2 emissions. And on the air quality side, we've seen NOx emissions and particulate matter and other things being of concern. And this graphic on the right-hand side is quite interesting because it shows from the latest inventory report that the EU sends to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the differences in capture of methane reported by different countries. You can see this vast difference in the different countries about landfill gas capture. And that reflects all sorts of things. It reflects history. It reflects the fact that some countries have banned landfilling of waste earlier than others. And sometimes it reflects the fact that actually there's still quite a lot of poor performance going on. There's all sorts of factors in there. And then there's disamenity. Margareta was talking about the social justice issues. Disamenity is, if you like, how local communities experience the presence of these facilities, and they're often found in areas of relatively higher deprivation than don't tend to find them in the wealthier neighborhoods of cities. And so, there's social justice issues around here, and the economic impacts of these are quite significant, potentially affecting house prices, particularly where facilities are located in urban areas. So we've got a good track record. Landfill methane emissions have declined. You can see over time we've had more methane used to generate energy, but still a lot going out into the atmosphere. This again is from the EEA's report. We've had a reduction in waste sent to landfills over time. We've had a reduction in the waste sent to managed waste disposal sites over time, a reduction in the methane emissions from unmanaged disposal sites as well. But at the same time, on the incinerator side, we've got an increase. We've got more municipal waste being incinerated. This is total waste being incinerated. It's going from 100 to 160 million tons. The actual amount of municipal waste is close to 60. It seems likely, because the capture of plastics for recycling is less good than many of the other materials, that we're concentrating some of the plastics in the waste that's left over after sorting. So, and the member states reporting might not always reflect that, but nonetheless, this is what's happened to CO2 emissions from incineration. You don't see that under the waste chapter, because incineration emissions are reported under the energy sector, under stationary combustion, so you don't see them under the waste chapter. And so this is an important point. The compound annual growth rate of CO2 emissions from incineration is 5% per annum over the last 30 years. It's gone up by 300%. So, you know, you've got that's eating into these benefits that we're supposedly getting from removing landfill. And when we look at, when the European Environment Agency tells us that the waste sector is responsible for 3% of all emissions, it hasn't looked at incineration. It's looked at the waste chapter, not the emissions from the waste sector. So let's go. I just want to pick up on this point about the energy generation, the changes in the carbon intensity, and to show what that means for an incinerator. When I started 20 years ago, you know, in planning inquiries locally, it was always claimed that incinerators would displace coal, and you'd get this big emissions credit for the incinerator associated with avoiding coal-fired power generation. Now, that's not really sustainable anymore. We're phasing out coal. So what happens if you assume it's gas that you're displacing, then that credit drops quite significantly. And if you go to the EU average carbon intensity, it drops further still. So what happens is you see this credit dropping over as we go to a decarbonized energy generation. And as a consequence, the net outcome of burning waste, instead of looking like it's saving you carbon when you're displacing coal, it actually contributes to CO2 emissions when you're displacing gas, and it contributes even more as you're displacing the EU average. And of course, over time, as that credit drops to zero, we go fully renewable, then what happens is that blue bar there looks more or less the same as the direct emissions from the facility itself, this bar on the left. So you start to concentrate on the direct emissions associated with the facility. And the same is true of landfills. You have to start looking at the direct emissions. So we're going to be focused on the fossil-derived CO2 emissions from the incinerator and the potential for the landfills to lead to methane generation. And frankly, we've got to get rid of both. And so let's look at how we do that. One other part of this story, though, mixed waste sorting. Look at what happens if I put a modern mixed waste sorting facility today in front of a landfill. I improve the landfill's performance by something around 0.35 or so tons of CO2 per ton of waste going into the whole system. And that's partly because I'm taking out plastics and I'm getting some benefits from recycling. Now, if I do the same for incineration, not only do I get the benefit from taking the plastics out and recycling them, but because that plastic was part of the fossil-derived CO2 that goes up the stack in the incinerator, I get a double benefit. And so I actually get an even bigger switch when I'm moving from this situation of sort of 0.35, and then on the right-hand side, I'm back at below the line again. So I'm actually making a significant contribution by fitting mixed waste sorting systems at the front of an incineration plant. And if we put the whole thing together, we've got all these different options. And essentially what we're arguing for is let's go from here, incineration and landfill, these two columns here, to these ones over here. So instead of these green bars being what we're going to emit from these facilities in the future, we're actually going to be going back into a more, much better position vis-a-vis climate change. Let's try and make sure we're pushing things into these types of facilities, not keeping them over here on the left-hand side. So how are we going to do that? First thing, the Landfill Directive, Article 6. It's always required treatment, and member states have interpreted treatment in very different ways. And there was an attempt through the Malagrotta ruling from the European Court of Justice to clarify this. It didn't really. And so the problem is we need to properly define treatment of waste prior to landfilling. Let's do it properly. Let's do it properly to require the mixed waste sorting. And then, because the mixed waste sorting hasn't really addressed the potential of the landfill to generate methane, before it goes into the landfill, let's biologically stabilize it, so it's less likely to generate methane when it goes in the landfill. Crucial. Let's do it quickly, because we know that that's a key determinant of what is going to drive the pace of climate change emissions in the future. Let's set a good example to the rest of the world, because the rest of the world should be doing this as well. On recommendation 2, we've got targets, old targets for the amount of biodegradable waste landfill. Why don't we just make sure that people don't worry too much about that? Tell them that if they've treated the waste as per recommendation 1 for the purpose of the directive, we'll no longer consider it biodegradable, so just get on with it. You've done your job, bang. So waste should be considered no longer biodegradable as long as it's undergone that treatment as per recommendation 1. Recommendation 3, now this is an interesting one, because one of the concerns at the moment of all municipal waste at the moment, about 31% is being incinerated. If we're going to get to a 65% recycling target, then we only want the 1 minus 65% at most, which is 35%. So there's not much scope for increasing incineration across the EU unless we're going to massively increase the amount of waste we're going to generate. So we're worried about countries moving away from landfills to incineration quickly, and therefore locking in to incineration technology. There's all sorts of reasons why we should now remove the R1 formula from the Waste Framework Directive that enables a waste incinerator to be classified as recovery. This historically has a sort of messy history. I've been watching that as a professional ever since its inception. And, you know, we go back to the point, you know, to days in the early 2000s when the Commission itself published a study. It says it's a methodological study, but nonetheless, the results are there, which questions, if you like, why you would put incineration above landfill in a hierarchy anyway. And this question of why we want to define incineration as a recovery option is rather strange to me, because it's not what the OECD generally does in its transfrontier shipments rulings. And really, we should be recognizing the fact that the case for classifying an incinerator as a recovery option is diminishingly strong, as the resources that we're displacing are no longer fuels, but things like the sun and the wind. Why does it make sense to classify this as a recovery option? And the problem is we're putting incineration above landfills, even though what we find when we look at the full analysis is that if we properly treat waste prior to landfilling, it's no worse than, it may be better than incinerating, particularly if we're not incinerating without any sorting. So why would we put these two on different levels? So remove the R1 formula. That's what we need to do, because we've got this distorting effect of pushing everyone towards incineration away from landfill. And it's happening too quickly because various articles in the Waste Framework Directive and the Landfill Directive push member states in that direction. Let's put them on the same level. Let's call them both disposal, please. Recommendation 4. The Article 5.5 target that's now in place, this is the one that was referred to earlier. Member states can send 10% at most of their waste, municipal waste, to landfill by 2035. Well, it's not, let's not, what we really want to do is stop member states sending untreated waste to landfill. So let's set that target and set it at 0. Let's say we don't want any more untreated waste to go to landfill. So here it is, to ensure that by 2030, let's get there quickly. The amount of municipal waste landfilled without treatment prior to landfilling, i.e. as per recommendation 1, is 0. let's do it. Recommendation 5. I showed how we get a benefit from, in terms of climate change, of putting mixed waste sorting at the front of an incinerator. It reduces the climate change emissions. The Industrial Emissions Directive and the associated BREF on incineration includes nothing about CO2 on waste. The Industrial Emissions Directive actually allows for permits to be set for installations that don't include CO2 as limit values for CO2, where those installations are part of the European Emissions Trading Scheme. Well, incinerators aren't, but there's nothing in the BREF about CO2. There's nothing in the BREF about how you might treat waste before it goes into a landfill to reduce CO2. There's nothing in the IED about that. So why? You got it for landfill, why don't you have it for incineration? So I think logically, in this time of critical climate change issues, we need to move forward on that. Critically, let's put pressure on residual waste. Let's get it down. Let's encourage prevention as well as increasing in recycling. So here we've set a target. We've suggested a target for municipal waste, residual municipal waste, of 175 kilograms per inhabitant across the EU. We've looked at various targets. This is one where about 17 member states will have to take additional action to meet that target if they get their 65% recycling target for municipal waste in the future, and no further increase in waste generation. Feels like a good sort of balance between a bit of challenge without it being horrendously difficult, and it could be reviewed, say, 5 years in advance. I mentioned all along, incineration escapes so many different ways of the economic instruments designed to make people improve what they're doing. Well, we've either got to look very closely at taxing it or whatever, or more, you know, for the CO2 element, at least put it into the emissions trading scheme. It's treated, as I said earlier, in terms of the inventories as an energy facility, but it doesn't sit in the it doesn't sit under the emissions trading scheme, even though lots of other energy generating facilities are. So I think it's logical now to move this in. I was a little disappointed not to see that as a proposal in the Fit for 55, but I think part of that is because people look at the Fit for 55, people look at the analysis and they look at the emissions from the waste sector and they think that's it. But it isn't, because the incinerator emissions are under the energy sector, but they're not under the emissions trading scheme. And it's not clear to me that the Fit for 55 package has properly looked at this, even when it looks at the effort sharing regulation for how member states deal with waste. Finally, I think you've got a lot of country taxes. You could choose to, on landfills, you could choose to put that in landfills as well into the emissions trading scheme. But I actually quite like the idea of requiring a minimum differential between treated waste and untreated waste. And if that was set at about €75 per tonne, you can bet your bottom dollar people would be moving quite quickly into treating waste before landfilling, because they would have an economic incentive to do it, much as the Austrians did when they implemented their restriction on landfilling back in the early 2000s. So key results would be, at a rough guess, 50-60 million tonnes of CO2 saved by 2035 by doing those things. We'd be signalling through that new target that residual waste is to be reduced over and above what's implied by the recycling targets. We reduce the likelihood of locking into less flexible solutions, and we've got greater consistency with the Green Deal and the circular economy. That's me done. I'm sorry, I'm a little over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dominic. What an excellent work, and so interesting and so useful to have your analysis for the debate that that we have here today. I want to remind all that this report is available on the library section of the Zero Waste Europe website, which is www.zerowasteeurope.eu, and please download it, give it a read after this event. So for now, I'm sure that our panel and our audience are eager to discuss these findings. So let's bring all the speakers in. In addition to Margaret Oken and Dominic Hock, we are today also welcoming to this panel Mattia Pellegrini, the head of unit of Waste Management and Secondary Materials of DG Environment at the European Commission. Sandra Benzik, still not with us, but she will join us shortly, a member of the Croatian Parliament, and Henrik Larsen, Chief Financial Officer at Bofa, Regional Municipality of Bornholm in Denmark. Thank you so much all for joining us today. We will start with a quick reaction from Mattia Pellegrini to our report, and then each panelist will have a couple of minutes to also give us your feedback. Thank you so much, Mattia. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it is a pleasure to listen to Dominique as usual. And indeed, he has been working a lot with us in preparing lots of impact assessment. I can see that he missed this job of supporting the Commission in preparation of impact assessment, because indeed they did the typical work that you need to do for the revision of a legislation like the Landfill Directive. So let me start with there are several recommendations actually which affect several pieces of legislation in what Dominique said. So the first point that one of the key points that Dominique made is how to reduce waste generation. And indeed, as you are aware actually, this is one of the priorities under the new Circular Economy Action Plan on how to reduce waste generation. So not only how to manage well the waste, but how to reduce. So on that, indeed, we are following a bit what Dominique is recommending, because in view of the revision of the Waste Framework Directive in 2023, we are also assessing the feasibility of including a waste prevention target. So that is clearly, we are actually assessing two pieces of legislation, the possibility to introduce a waste prevention target. First of all, in the packaging waste directive, and then later on in the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. Indeed, what Dominique has described as an option is one of the two options that you could indeed, as one of the options, regulate the amount of residual waste per capita or per inhabitant, and then force the member states to respect that European average. Of course, the beauty of what Dominique has presented is that then member states have different tools to achieve that target in terms of waste prevention. The limit of that is that when you look at the statistics per member states, there are quite a lot of differences in terms of amount of residual waste per capita. So that could create a clear division across the European member states. But clearly, as I said, it's part of our reflection on the revision of the Waste Framework Directive. Then I'll come to another big problem that Dominique has mentioned in the recommendation, which is the issue of methane from landfilling. Indeed, the Commission is aware of that, and that's the reason why we issued a 2020 strategy on methane. It was really a political decision, and we were asked to contribute as a waste unit in the environment. And indeed, you have seen that now there is a clear commitment by the Commission to assess the issue of methane as part of the landfilling review, which is foreseen for 2024. So in the current landfill directive, as you know, there is a review clause by 2024. So as part of this review, we are now added also the issue of methane and how to reduce methane emissions from landfilling. I also would like to mention that as part of this 2024 review, indeed, we not only have noticed what Dominique has presented today, but we also read the reaction of the Parliament to the Circular Economy Action Plan, where the rapporteur Uitema has been asking for zero landfilling policy. So there, indeed, the Commission will also consider the possibility to amend Article 5, and we will study the possibility of changing the target. And indeed, one of the options will be to bring it down to zero for untreated waste. So that will be part of the study on the review of the Landfill Directive. Then, and the same will apply to Article 6 of the Landfill Directive, so in terms of treatment, how to improve the treatment. And the last point I would like to make as a reaction is on incineration, and indeed, the Commission is fully aware of the emission side of incineration. However, at least if I look at the data that my colleagues have provided to me, incineration, if you compare from the 90s to now, in terms of emissions are going down, but still remain a very important component. So indeed, the option of, for example, of regulating landfilling in terms of emission under the Industrial Emission Directive is one of the options that the Commission is actually assessing. There is an ongoing impact assessment on the Industrial Emission Directives, and indeed is not done in this case by my unit, but we're working very closely with the colleagues in Directorate C of the Environment, working on the revision of the Industrial Emission Directive. The last point I wanted to mention more at a general level, so I've tried really to react and to specify, there is something which we tend to forget, and we should never forget that the level of landfilling, and this is one of the key problem in dealing with that policy, is completely different, and there are huge variations across the member states. So you have around 10 member states which already now they comply with the 10% target. But why they comply with the 10% target? Because they make large use of incineration. And then you have a number of member states, actually the majority of them, which are very far, some of them extremely far, from the 10% target, which is we have currently under the current directive from 2035. So that's I think is an additional difficulties with this file, where I mean it's typically from waste policy, but in this case of landfilling is even more important. The huge differences which they exist between the north and the south, and the west and the east. So that's in terms really of landfilling targets. Indeed, as I said, there are some member states which are already complying, but they comply because they use incineration, and other member states which are very far. When I say very far, we're talking about 60 to 70% of landfilling, at least in certain areas of these member states. So clearly, there is plenty of room for improvement, and I think improvement can be achieved, as I mentioned, with different changes in different pieces of legislation. And I think what the study Dominique has carried out is really a lot of food for thought for us. It is also reassuring for us, as a final comment, that some of the things that Dominique is proposing are already ongoing in the Commission at technical level. So I think for us it was a reassurance that we're going in the right direction. There are some new ideas which Dominique has put on the table, also, for example, in terms of ETS, which at the moment we have not dealt this with our colleagues in the GCLIMA, but it could be also an option at least to be looked into the details. So, for example, the inclusion of incineration and the ETS, which was another one of the recommendations. So really very useful, and I would like to thank also Zero Waste Europe for the organization of this event.
Thank you so much, Mattia, for your insights. Next, I would like to give the floor to Margaret to have your perspective, couple of minutes to hear from a member of the EU Parliament, shadow rapporteur as well on the EP opinion report on the Circular Economy Action Plan. The floor is yours, Margaret.
Yeah, thank you. I think really I need to be able to read this here more carefully. You know, I'm not the expert, and it was quite a demanding presentation from you, Dominique. So I look forward to look into it for sure. And so my reaction would just leave the floor to both things. Coming from the country which I normally declare, the champion among we are the pure mans among everybody. You know, we have been the leading incineration country, so I've had this debate at home for a long time. The emissions, is it the right way of using resources, and so on and so forth. And I have the feeling that hopefully all of us will go the opposite way now, not only of course to turn it to stop this too much incineration, but also to stop at all having this residual waste. But I will leave the floor and the time to my fellow participants in the panel, because I think it's more interesting for you to listen to them than to me here. Thank you.
Okay, Margaret, Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on to Henrik now. Could you please give us the reaction from a local waste management company perspective? Thank you so much for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. BOFA is taking care of all waste on Bornholm, and we are part of the municipality. We have an incineration plant, and we have a landfill, and we expect that the incineration plant will be depreciated in 2032, and about the same time the landfill will be filled up. So a couple of years ago, we said to ourselves, what do we do about that? Because we are an island, we have water all around us, and it's expensive to transport waste away from the island. So we made the vision Bornholm showing the way without waste in 2032. Of course, we know that maybe it's not possible totally to not have waste, but saying that we only should have 5% back would not be ambitious. How can we do this? We expect that Bornholm is a full community. We have a port, we have an airport, hospital, and we're about 40,000 inhabitants. So we thought that maybe Bornholm could be a test island, and we could get some partners who had ideas and would like to test something, because if you explore it with about 100, you have the Danish figures. And we have had success with that. We have got partners as Nestle and BASF working with different kind of plastic, and we have 3 persons in our project team working with solutions there. So we think we will do this before 32. And of course, we are looking for further partners who can help us, and we can help them with testing things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrik, and congratulations on your ambition. It's really inspiring. Thanks so much for joining us today. Great. So now we're going to move on to take some questions from the participants. I have a couple of clarification questions for Dominic to start with. I'm going to read them, the 2 of them, and you can address them both at the same time, Dominic. So the situation is also heterogeneous in Europe. Some countries are very advanced, others have up to 80% of waste being landfilled. Waste management is not just about greenhouse gas emissions. Landfill diversion via complementary action of recycling and waste to energy using non-recyclable waste for a resource not only prevents methane emissions that are more powerful than greenhouse gas than CO2, but also other long-term risks of pollution. What about this impact in pollution prevention? We dump them in a hole and forget about the long-term impacts, land use, etc. So this is one question. The second is the recommendation 6 target is too generic. It should be split for cities and for smaller municipalities with a tighter target for the latter ones. I'll leave it to you.
So the first one, I'm not sure I got it completely. I'm, of course, want to see prevention of pollution. The good thing about stabilizing landfill is you can also address some of the less pleasant aspects of landfilling and the nature of the leachate, the potential to generate leachate and so forth, because you're reducing the potential to generate methane and the various acids that lead to the leaching of those sorts of metals. So it's not just about reducing the methane emissions, it's also partly about reducing other emissions also. We could go into some of the emissions on the incinerator side, but I don't think, and we've done a little bit of that in the report. But you know, I don't disagree with the view that we should be trying to reduce pollution at all. As part of the problem, in a sense, is that but the way I see the history of the sort of landfill versus incineration discussion is it's almost as though landfill's being treated as a terrible option just because it's called a landfill. Well, we've got to have a better reason than that. We've got to analyze what we're talking about. And obviously, if we're landfilling stuff that's very different to untreated material, then we may be in a very different situation. It appears to me, at any rate, that we are. So just as we're arguing for taking materials out the front end of incineration plants also to maximize the use of the resources and to reduce the emissions of CO2 from incineration, I'm not an apologist for either landfill or incineration, quite the opposite. I want to see both of them minimized as far as possible. So on the second point, with the target for residual waste, I think it is recommendation 6. I think the thing is, if you're setting this policy as a European Commission, you, I think, would probably sensibly leave member states to determine how they get to that particular outcome. And it may well be that a member state says, well, okay, we're going to allow different rates in different types of municipality, and that may make sense. I think Mattia made the point that the data here isn't great. And so one of the things we said in the report is that you probably would want to look at this target, whether it's been set at the right level or not, once the reporting that we're expecting to come forward, now that there's been a sort of clearer definition of municipal waste in the Waste Framework Directive, once that's sort of come through, I think we'll start to get some more reliable and comparable data about what's going on. And it may well be that 175 kilograms per inhabitant is too loose. And it may be that you want to tighten it a little. But I think it may be, you know, it's possible you could differentiate at the European level and calculate based on differentiating the two. We've also made the point in the report that it might be necessary to adjust in some cases for things like tourism and those sorts of features on that sort of target. But the household, we looked also at setting this as a target for household waste, but the household waste data is even worse, it seems to me. Certainly at the European level of reporting it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dominic. I'm very happy to welcome Sandra Bensic, the member of the Croatian Parliament.
Hi.
And hi, I'm sure that you also want to share your feedback on the presentation and on the debate that we're having today, Sandra. So if you wanted, now we could give you the floor to have your reaction for a couple of minutes, as all the other panelists have had the chance before. So thank you so much, Sandra, for joining today.
But, yeah, please excuse me because I'm late, so I couldn't participate on the part of the presentation that was before. I just joined in. We are having quite a difficult day here in the Parliament regarding some political issues, some of them connected to waste management as well. So this is why I'm as well late. As you know, the policy that I represent is the policy of Green Left parliamentary group called Možemo, and we are advocating, of course, for different types of waste management, which includes way to zero waste. And we are very much dedicated, also on the level of City of Zagreb, to change the policy that was that we had until now, until the change of government. So I wanted to say that what we are facing here in Croatia is that we have in total like 29 to 31, it depends on the statistic you look at, 31% of recycling, that everything else is being landfilled. or transform into RDF. We are trying to fight that. We are trying to fight this model, and we are trying to, on one hand, increase the recycling and reuse of waste, but we are also trying to fight the policy which is being now pushed a lot, and that is the policy regarding the incinerators as a solution for the residual waste. On the level of city of Zagreb, what we have is a landfill, but this is not, everything is being landfilled practically, and very low percent, below 30% of the waste is being reused. So everything else is being landfilled, and it's a huge problem. So we are now trying to set up a new concept for the waste management. Yes. And if you can please just give me the questions, because I just joined in, so I couldn't follow the discussion until now.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Yeah, so participants are sharing their questions via the Q&A, and then I'm going to pass them on to you. So in this way, we save time. So we're going to go back then now to the questions. Thanks so much, Sandra, for your feedback and being here with us today. I think next question is going to be for Mattia Pellegrini, and I'm going to read it as it came in. So it says, Mattia, if you are there, I'm just going to read this now. So it says, some are interpreting that the 65 net material recovery is a fixed level in planning, as if it is a maximum recycling rate, not a minimum one. We think this goes against the spirit of the circular economy agenda and vision, which asks for being as ambitious as possible. Is this your opinion too?
Can you repeat, because the audio was not very...
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm going to repeat. So it talks about the target of the 65% recycling. It says, some are 65% material recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it
but
says
in which legislation?
In the Waste Framework Directive.
Okay.
Yeah. So it says that some are interpreting the 65% net material recovery as a fixed level in planning, as if it was a maximum recycling rate, not a minimum one. We think the person that submitted the question, we think this goes against the spirit of the circular economy agenda and vision, which asks for being as ambitious as possible. Is it your opinion too?
I don't have an opinion on that, because I don't know this topic, so I need to look into it. I prefer to study the specific. I mean, I have no problem if you can forward it to me, this question, and I can look into that with my colleagues in the team, and yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Fine. Great. So we have another question for Henrik. So it's about the cradle-to-cradle product concepts coming before 2030, where it says, where are the cradle-to-cradle product concepts coming before 2030, before sending these products as waste to MBT, incineration, or landfill? I think it's asking about, in your vision, in your zero waste vision, where can we find these cradle-to-cradle concepts in the products? If you can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you please repeat?
So in the zero waste vision that you have set up, is there a place for the cradle to cradle concept? Is there a place in which the products, what happened with the products that we send to waste, to MBT, incineration, and landfill? How is the waste reduction going to take place?
We know something today. We know what will happen from now on and until 23. There is a requirement from the EU and from the government then we have some ideas about what will happen from 24 and until 28. And then we have the period from 28 up to 2032. We don't know what happened there. It will be new technology, but we want all of our waste to become and be treated as a resource. Today we burn about 25% of the waste. We get district heating from that plant, but in 1 year we will take out about 10% of the waste to make gas instead from the food waste, then we have a lot of things going to the landfill. We have 7% of the waste going to landfill. Some of it can be used again, but it requires some technology, and it requires that somebody helps us with making some tests. It could be isolation materials which could be reused. They are going to landfill today. From 24, we expect waste from we have a plan for when some of the fractions should be used, reused, and the last of them, which will come from 28, most of it will be what is going to landfill today. From now on and until 24, we are looking into small burnable items, waste from municipal companies and institutions. Then we, in the period from 24 to 28, we are looking into construction waste, for example. I don't. I think was that an answer?
We'll leave it at there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have another question here for either Margaret or Mattia, and it's about the Circular Economy Action Plan, which states that packaging put on the market should either be reusable or recyclable by 2030. But how do we ensure that recyclable packaging waste do no longer go to landfill?
Yeah, I can start with that. And indeed, it's a very good question. And so we are actually in the final stage of the impact assessment for the packaging waste directive. Dominique knows something about that because when he was still with Eunomia, was helping us on that. And indeed, we are introducing, and the idea is to introduce criteria under which it will be mandatory to have a design for recycling and to make sure that any packaging which is not recyclable or reusable cannot be placed into the market after 2030. So I think the question is valid, and I don't have a reply now, but it's a very good source of information for us because indeed, for example, since I mentioned that there is the review of the landfilling directive, and since we know that we are coming with this design for recycling standard plus potentially even a traffic light approach where you will classify type of packaging in 3 categories, and whatever is red means not recyclable, not reusable. In 2030 will no longer be possible to be placed in the market. So we may indeed, for example, when thinking about what we do on packaging, review the landfill directive when we do it in 2024, and indeed consider the adoption of what about beyond any, I mean, there is the big push by the parliament to go down from 10 to 0 in terms of landfilling, but we could consider that even if we remain at 10%, we could, for example, for packaging, I'm thinking loudly, indeed consider a 0% landfilling policy, because indeed why we should make all packaging reusable and recyclable if we then ends up in a landfilling. So we should ensure that at least that stream, which is a very important waste stream, remains completely outside landfilling. So clearly this can be done with the landfilling review, not with a packaging review, but indeed knowing that this is the direction of the packaging review, we should indeed also consider how to ensure that what is reusable or recyclable remains outside the landfilling, because it will be really, from an environmental point of view, a suboptimal solution.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Margaret.
Yeah. Just to say that I'm also wondering to hear Henrik's answer. My fear is that the Commission are not talking about Monsieur Pellegrini, but the Commission is very unambitious to live up to all kinds of environmental laws for the moment. We have lots of troubles in the Petitions Committee for the Commission, refraining from taking action when it's that kind of things. And with that very low ambition from the Commission, I am quite nervous for what will happen to these laws here, because of course they should be respected, and we should follow up what are the countries doing, how will they follow this here, and so on and so forth. And I think that we need to be much more, tough. And still, it's not you, Mattia, but I think you know what I'm talking about. The Commission has just declared that petitions not concerning big principles, they will not deal with them any longer. They will not deal with these things. So I think we have a basic problem within the EU for the moment, and I can promise you that I will be one of the warriors in this war, because if we don't live up to our laws, why are we here? If it's just seen as nice recommendations, and where you hope that the countries will take up their duties, but of course you will not act if they don't, then, and we are in that situation just now. Just to say that I do understand the question, and I think that we should be much more, eager to fulfill our obligations and duties. And looking forward to Henrik's answer if he has an answer.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for your energy and commitment. I have a question, though, for Sandra and Henrik as well in the last minutes of this webinar. I think it's more like a comment from someone in the audience. I think a better approach to zero waste is focusing on upstream interventions and systems, which I believe to the best approach to address and tackle issues related to waste. Incineration and landfill are more of downstream interventions, which, to my opinion, are not sustainable. What's your reaction to that comment, to Sandra or Henrik?
Yeah, I can try. Well, in my opinion, the most important area of intervention is how we produce waste, and the production of waste is the key policy, and reducing the production of waste is the key policy that we need to implement. That means that we need to really intervene in a way that we, in a very, very near future, really remove from the market all those products and all those packagings and all those materials which are not recyclable, which cannot be recycled, and we still have a lot of those, and which are, I don't know how you say it in English, one time only for usage, for one-time usage, yeah. So basically, I think this is the main area of intervention, but we do not see, and still, that there are interventions in that, very serious interventions in that direction. It is still, most of that policy is left to the market, to decide, to companies to decide, to do it because their consumers want it that way. And it's not a hard policy. I think this should be hard policy, that we completely in a period of 5 to 10 years, remove from the market all those things that cannot be recycled. Otherwise, we will not be able to reduce waste 100% in a way that it's being suggested here. We cannot go on a way to the zero waste if the production model, as we have now, and the policies that regulate the production of waste stay the same. So basically, I think this is not an issue that should be decided on the voluntary basis. I think it's not something that we can leave up to the market to decide. I think it's the very hardline policy we need to have.
Thank you, Sandra. Henrik?
Yeah, I agree. Landfill and incineration is not sustainable. And despite that we have a financial reason to go for zero waste, it's also, of course, because these two places are not sustainable.
Very clear. Thank you, Henrik. I have one final question that could be for Dominic or for anyone in the panel, really. It goes like this. It says, can we reduce the whole life impacts of unavoidable waste without embracing more difficult technologies? Biostabilization and pretreatment are often dismissed by industry and governments as too difficult or expensive compared to current treatment methods. Of course, there is nothing easier than dumping waste in a giant hole or setting it on fire. Imagine if other sectors like transport, energy, or the built environment were so reticent to embrace change based on cost of technologies and technological challenge. We wouldn't have any innovation, would we?
Yeah, I think I have some sympathy with that view. Obviously, it's perhaps a slightly too prehistoric view of landfill incineration, but I get the picture. But I think what I think is happening is that the circumstances under which we look at these technologies are also changing, and what used to frame the way we used to think about them has changed, and we need to embrace that change in our mindsets overall to recognize that we're probably going to have to spend more on dealing with waste if we're not going to recycle it, and we're going to deal with it in a manner that is now fit for the 21st century. I think we need to do as good of things as we can with the stuff that's left over. I want as little of that stuff to be left over as possible. There's an earlier question about how do we make sure that when packaging is recyclable, it does get recycled. Well, one of the ways to do that is to have a second go at the waste through the mixed waste sorting to extract it. And one of the ways we might find that getting funded in future is through extended producer responsibility schemes as the plastic packaging manufacturers look to achieve their targets. So I can see, there's some synergies here in how the Commission's overall package is helping things to fit together. And so I think, we do need to embrace these technologies, but I'm not utterly convinced we're embracing them sufficiently strongly anywhere. And some of these technologies now, they're not radical or new, they're already there, and I think suitable for adoption if we can do so.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Dominic. Right, so we are in the last 5 minutes of this event. I'm going to ask the panelists if you'd like to have 30 seconds. This is your final sentence, your final idea that you want to share with the audience today. Margaret, you want to start? 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would do that. I'm happy this year. I'm looking forward to looking more into the report, because I think that it sounds as if there are not only good targets, but also good means to how to obtain this target. But let me see, we have quite good laws, we have very good intentions, make it done then. Come on, it's not enough just to have these targets and then celebrate each other for good targets and then, well, doing nothing and or close to. So I will, that's a little wrinkle to the Commission, but also to others, make it done, make it happen.
Thank you, Margaret. Mattia?
Yes, so two comments. One, the study provided by Dominique has been extremely useful, and as I said, it gives us lots of food for thought, and both for the revision of the Waste Framework Directive, but also of the Landfill Directive. And to reply to Margaret, I would say that I think we have tried to design the future of environmental policy with the batteries regulation. So I think I totally agree with your assessment that often you have all these targets, you have all this transposition by member states, and there is a very, let's say, lengthy process of assessing whether the member states are complying or not. As we've seen, independently of the targets in the batteries regulation, where indeed you may have a different view and you may think they're not as ambitious as you would like, but the concept of transforming a directive into a regulation and then using not an environmental legal basis but an internal market legal basis to fully harmonize the environment is really an innovative approach which responds to your concern, in the sense that this would be targets binding on economic operators. So there will be an immediate impact after the adoption on the market, which is that's and for us as the Commission, that what we did with the batteries regulation is the model that we would like to follow. I'm not being here. That's my 30 seconds, and they were even more so.
Thank you so much, Mattia. Thank you. Sandra, please, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, as I come from Croatia, we are on the lowest level in European Union regarding recycling rates and waste management in general. So basically, some of the targets, which are even not ambitious enough for us, are really ambitious because we need to get there. We need to get to 65%. We are now around 30. So. What I wanted to say from our position, what we are focusing on is the investments in reuse of waste. So we really decrease the amount of waste that goes to landfills, or I hope there will be no incineration, but basically maybe that's where this government is heading to. But on the other hand, also really serious interventions in the way the waste is being produced. And that means that we really need to focus also on preparation of the citizens and education of the citizens for future actions in relation to how we consume and how we use things. And I think that without that, we will not be able to get to the zero waste.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And we're just on time to go, but we want to hear from Henrik as well, obviously. So Henrik, your 30 seconds, and we're just going to have to ask everyone to be a little bit patient, giving us a couple of extra minutes to finish the event. Henrik.
Yes, I just want to say that Bornholm as a test island, we are not big enough to get a critical mass on a lot of fractions, but to make it really sustainable, it would be nice if we could get some partners helping us with handling some of these fractions locally instead of using trucks to drive it other places to Germany or Sweden.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much all. Right, so
I can't hear you, Mario.
oh, sorry. Thank you so much. Okay, so right. we are now coming to the conclusion of our event. Thank you so much to each and every one of the panelists for your presence and enthusiasm. Special thanks for Margaret Oken and her special support promotion of this event. We hope that this has contributed to the debate on the need to revise the current residual waste policy and law, that the Commission will consider those proposals in the upcoming review of waste directives foreseen for 2024. Thank you so much to everyone, to all the participants here in Zoom and also in YouTube. It was great to have you today, and we hope that you enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. Thank you so much, and see you soon.